Thank you, Jose. Well, I guess the Deputy Minister is still not here, and the Chairperson of the Portfolio Committee. But in their absence, I'd like to recognize them. And ladies and gentlemen, let me first of all thank the organizers of this symposium under the leadership of its chairperson, Andile Ngcaba. Many of us know Andile as the person who first introduced us into this industry. In particular, he acted as a steward to the involvement in large numbers of Black people into this industry, which had been exclusively the preserve of our white fellow compatriots. I feel honored to be sharing this platform with such an illustrious group of speakers. The discussion of this white paper follows 20 years after the groundbreaking white paper which was discussed in 1996, which was followed by far-reaching legislation in the same year, which officially introduced the regulator of this industry, known as SATRA, South African Telecommunications Regulatory Authority, of which I had the honor of being the first deputy chairman. A few years later, in 2001, I led the founding of the SACF, whose main claim to fame would be that it galvanized the industry into one chamber, from small operators to the largest operators, a sort of chamber of ICTs, if you know what I mean. My exposure to the ICT industry in South Africa was followed by my participation in a small group of consultants called Chemelinks International, which ran conferences in Johannesburg, Maputo, Accra, Kigali, and Abuja in cooperation with the ministers of communications of these countries, encouraging cooperation between policymakers, international industry, and regulators. This symposium reminds me of the heydays of the SACF, when there was not a single policy document, regulation, and implementation strategy in which the SACF did not contribute towards. The common thread in the participation of the SACF was that of opening up the industry to as many of our citizens as is possible. And to a very large extent, our industry has been able to achieve that, not only technologically, but organizationally, something which, to my knowledge, has never been achieved in our continent of Africa. I think Kolani, in his presentation, did mention that at one time, if you went into a room like this, you'd only, in this industry, you'd only find pale males. You didn't find a single Black person. Today, it's directly the opposite. Let me give you an example of something that the SICF was able to achieve. The transfer of the domain name authority from a few white individuals to become an authority governed by a board nominated by the minister was a struggle fought by the SACF. There is no doubt in my mind that the ICTs are indeed the biggest enabler of development, followed by electricity. And I repeat, they are the biggest enabler of development, followed by electricity. Many of you have visited Rwanda and will have had the experience of how ICTs have developed that country. Recently, I learned that medicines were delivered over rugged hills of Rwanda using drones. If this is not development, then I don't know what it is. Another example is how an application was developed by young people, and we've emphasized here the involvement of young people in Kenya to assist farmers to exchange information on markets and the prices of goods. Another area that hopefully this symposium will address is that of providing ICT services to rural and township communities using cooperatives. As was the case in countries such as Finland, the United States, and other now developed countries, where rural communities formed ICT cooperatives in order to provide themselves with communications. In our country, we need to assist as industry the provision of these services without having to rely on the government. My sincere hope is that after this white paper and legislation, ICTs are going to be put squarely into the NDP as our 2030 strategy. I'm afraid Dr. Kwele will have to put on his strongest armor when he goes into cabinet with this proposal. But he'd have to make sure that when he comes out of that meeting, he is fully ready to implement that decision. I hope all of us here and elsewhere in the industry will support the minister when this takes place. I thank you.